What if one simple moment, just sitting down in your rightful seat, suddenly turned into a test of your worth as a human being? For Jordan Elias Maxwell, a black CEO who had built his life on discipline and hard work, that moment came on a quiet flight. He had paid for a VIP seat, earned it without question, yet, within minutes, he was told to leave it. Not because of error, not because of policy, but because someone else was considered more deserving. It's a scene that forces us to pause. What would you have done? Would you quietly move just to avoid conflict, or would you hold your ground, knowing that your dignity is worth more than peace in the moment? Now, imagine it was you in that seat, the eyes of strangers watching, authority figures pressing you, the silent weight of history whispering that this has happened too many times before. This story isn't just about an airline, it's about what happens when one man refuses to surrender his dignity, and what unfolded in just 5 minutes shocked the entire world. Stay with us, and if this story resonates, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear stories that truly matter. The Dallas-Fort Worth airport was humming that Monday morning, the way only America's busiest hubs could hum. Rolling suitcases clattered across the polished floor, loudspeakers repeated boarding calls, and the scent of strong coffee lingered in the air. Business travelers in pressed suits moved with practiced urgency, their eyes already fixed on the week ahead. Families wrestled with strollers and carry-ons, kids tugging at sleeves, impatient for vacation. Among them, Jordan Maxwell moved differently. He wasn't rushing, though his schedule was full. He wasn't distracted, though 100 emails waited in his inbox. At 44 years old, the founder and CEO of Maxwell Biotech carried himself with a quiet steadiness that drew eyes without demanding them. He wore a navy suit tailored sharp, but his presence wasn't about clothes, it was about weight, the kind of weight that comes from leading a company valued in the billions, from knowing the lives of thousands depended on your decisions. Jordan had spent the weekend delivering the keynote at a healthcare innovation summit. His company's breakthroughs in biotech were changing how hospitals treated genetic diseases. He had sat with governors, argued policy with senators, and shared panels with Nobel laureates. But now, all he wanted was to get home to his wife, Anna, and their daughter, Maya, in Chicago. The first-class ticket tucked into his hand wasn't about luxury. It was about catching 3 hours of rest before the next 12-hour day. He checked the boarding pass again. Flight 927, seat 1A, the very front of the plane, the kind of seat road warriors secretly prayed for. A little more legroom, a little more quiet, just enough space to breathe. The VIP boarding line was nearly empty when Jordan stepped into it. He placed his leather carry-on on the counter. The gate agent scanned the barcode, her smile faltering as she looked at the screen. Then her eyes flicked up at him, puzzled, almost doubtful. "Sir, are you sure you're in the right line?" she asked. Jordan kept his voice level. "This is the first-class line, isn't it?" "Yes, but sometimes there's confusion. May I see your ID again?" He slid his driver's license across the counter, his name embossed clearly, Jordan Elias Maxwell. His passport was there, too, just in case. The woman's cheeks flushed slightly. She typed something into her computer, frowned, and then handed the documents back. "All right, sir, you may proceed." Jordan gave a polite nod, though inside there was a familiar sting. He'd flown first class more times than he could count. Yet, every so often, there it was again, the question, the suspicion, the tiny flicker of disbelief that a black man belonged in this line. He had learned to absorb it, to let the weight settle without sinking him. As he walked toward the jet bridge, a teenager lifted her phone, surreptitiously recording. She had caught the exchange, and her caption flashed on TikTok within seconds. "This seat just cost an airline everything. Watch what happens next." Jordan didn't notice. He was already stepping into the plane, the cool blast of conditioned air brushing against his face. The first-class cabin glowed with soft lighting, wide leather seats waiting like thrones. Flight attendants offered practice smiles. Jordan found 1A, set his carry-on in the overhead, and eased into the seat. For the first time in days, his body let go a fraction, shoulders dropping as he leaned back. He had just opened a folder of briefing notes when it happened. A tall white man in his 50s entered the cabin. His blazer was unbuttoned, tie loosened with casual arrogance. The platinum tag on his luggage caught the light Platinum Elite. He scanned the cabin, then stopped at Jordan's seat. His mouth twisted slightly. "That's my seat," he said flatly. Jordan looked up, calm but firm. "I believe this is 1A. Correct. That's my boarding pass." He lifted it for the man to see. Before the man could respond, a supervisor appeared. She was in her 50s too, her badge reading Linda Hayes. Her eyes didn't even flicker toward Jordan's boarding pass. She focused entirely on the Platinum Elite passenger. "Mr. Harlan," she said smoothly, "I'll handle this." Turning to Jordan, her tone sharpened. "Sir, I'm afraid you'll need to give up this seat. It's reserved for our most loyal passengers." Jordan held out his pass. "I paid for 1A. It's printed right here." Linda didn't glance at it. "Sometimes there are errors. We'll reseat you further back." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. A few passengers watched, phones discreetly raised. Jordan felt the heat rise under his collar, but his voice remained measured. "I'm not moving. I bought this seat. I have every right to sit here." Linda's smile thinned, professional but cold. She signaled to a security officer standing near the entrance. "Please escort this gentleman out. We'll sort it later." The officer's hand hovered near Jordan's shoulder. A camera phone zoomed closer. Someone whispered, "This is insane." Jordan didn't resist. He slid his folder back into his bag, stood slowly, and allowed himself to be guided away from the seat he had rightfully purchased. Inside, his chest ached not from shame, but from the weight of déjà vu. He thought of his mother again, of her long rides at the back of buses in a Texas town that had never wanted her there. "Con, they'll always test if you belong," she had told him. "Your job is to know you do even when they don't." Jordan's mind sharpened. He wasn't just a boy watching his mother anymore. He was a man with power, and though they didn't know it yet, this moment would cost the airline more than they could imagine. He slipped his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the encrypted messaging app. He typed 3 words to his COO. Ethan Clark run the audit. By the time Jordan was led down the aisle, the plane wasn't just filled with passengers anymore. It was filled with witnesses. And outside, the teenager's video had already begun to climb past 1,000 views, racing toward the millions. The fight for seat 1A had only just begun. The officer's hand never tightened on Jordan's arm, but the message was clear. He was no longer welcome in the seat he had paid for. Passengers leaned into the aisle as he walked back, their eyes following him like shadows. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared with indignation, mouths pressed into thin lines. A few had phones raised high, recording every second. At the front of the cabin, Gregory Harlan slid casually into seat 1A, as though the world had righted itself. He placed his silver cuff-linked wrists on the armrest, stretched his long legs, and leaned back with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed the universe existed to accommodate him. Linda Hayes stood beside him with a polite smile that carried a trace of deference, as if she were in the presence of someone important. Jordan kept moving, past the rows of first-class leather seats, down into business, where flight attendants gestured vaguely to an empty aisle seat. He paused, glanced at the boarding pass still clutched in his hand, and felt the familiar ache in his chest deepen. He didn't sit down. He stood there for a moment, scanning the cabin, his mind already working. A murmur rippled from the row behind him. A young woman with chestnut hair and a bright scarf whispered loudly enough for others to hear. That man paid for his seat. Why should he move just because the other guy wanted it? A few heads nodded. A man in a navy blazer muttered, "That's not right." I saw his boarding pass, but Linda's voice carried over them. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your cooperation as we settle a minor seating issue. Please remain seated." Jordan's eyes met Linda's for the briefest second. Her expression didn't waver. To her, this was finished. But Jordan knew better. The teenager who had filmed earlier, Maya Ortiz, a college sophomore traveling home, was now live-streaming from her phone. She angled the camera just so, catching Jordan's calm face as he stood near the business class section, juxtaposed with Gregory sprawling in seat 1A like a king on his throne. Her voice was a low narration for the thousands who had already tuned in. This is happening right now on Flight 927. A black CEO was dragged out of his paid seat so a Platinum Elite member could have it. Watch closely, because I think this is about to explode. Jordan lowered himself into the aisle seat they'd given him, setting his bag gently on the floor. He wasn't angry in the way people expected anger to look. His jaw wasn't tight. His voice wasn't raised. Instead, his stillness was the kind that made people uneasy. The kind of stillness that suggested something larger was moving beneath the surface. As he settled, a memory pressed forward uninvited. He was 10 years old again, sitting beside his mother on a Greyhound bus. They had paid their fare, just like everyone else. But when the bus filled, the driver barked at them to move to the back. He remembered the way his mother's lips trembled, how her hand gripped his small one tight as they shuffled past rows of staring eyes. He remembered the humiliation that settled like lead in his chest. That night, she told him, "One day, you'll be in a position where they can't just push you to the back. When that day comes, don't forget what this feels like." Jordan straightened his shoulders. The ache in his chest wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was fuel. At the front of the cabin, Gregory ordered a glass of champagne with the entitlement of someone who believed the world owed him bubbles. Linda obliged quickly, her tone honeyed, her movements precise. Jordan reached for his phone, fingers sliding across the encrypted messaging app again. His message to COO Ethan Clark had already been sent. "Run the audit." It was 3 words, but it was enough. Ethan would understand. They had prepared for this exact humiliation, perhaps, but for the possibility that Maxwell Biotech's technology could one day be used as leverage against the very systems that tried to exclude people like them. The aircraft door closed with a thud, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming passengers and promising smooth skies. Yet, inside the cabin, The air was thick with tension. Every seat seemed to buzz with whispered commentary. Phones kept filming. Even the flight attendants, though outwardly composed, exchanged uneasy glances. Jordan leaned back, eyes closed, breathing slow. He knew the cameras were still on him. He knew the story was already out there, leaking like water through cracks, unstoppable. What he didn't know yet but suspected was how quickly it would spread. Because on the ground, Maya's live stream had already gone viral. In the span of 20 minutes, hashtags began to appear. Seat 1A trended in Dallas. By the time the plane taxied down the runway, it was trending nationwide. Clips from multiple angles surfaced. Different passengers had captured the moment from different seats. The internet stitched them together like evidence for a trial. In one video, you could see Linda's dismissive wave of the hand. In another, Gregory's smug smirk as he settled into 1A. In a third, Jordan's calm refusal to raise his voice, contrasted with the officer's looming presence at his side. The narrative was writing itself, a black CEO, worth billions, treated as if he didn't belong in the very seat he had purchased, replaced, humiliated, silenced. But what the internet didn't know yet was that Jordan wasn't finished. In the quiet of his seat, as the plane lifted into the sky, he whispered to himself words that only he could hear. 5 minutes, that's all it will take. It wasn't a threat. It was a calculation, a reminder. He had built systems designed to monitor, to audit, to expose corruption. And now, those systems were already in motion. Back in Dallas, Ethan Clark stared at his monitor in the Maxwell Biotech headquarters. Jordan's message glowed on his screen. Run the audit. He typed a command string, activating a secure link between Maxwell's servers and the airline's contracted infrastructure. Within seconds, logs began to download seat assignments, payment histories, employee messages. Ethan's jaw tightened as he saw irregularities flag themselves in red. Onboard flight 927 Jordan's phone buzzed once, discreetly. He glanced at the encrypted notification, lips curving slightly. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it was the kind of smile that unnerved those who underestimated him. Around him, passengers shifted, restless. Some were angry on his behalf. Others stayed silent, not wanting to get involved. But the silence in that cabin wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence before a storm. Gregory raised his champagne glass, oblivious to the tidal wave forming around him. Linda hovered near, fussing over details, avoiding the stares of other passengers. She didn't yet realize that the decision she made to push one man out of a seat would soon ignite something far larger than she could control. Jordan closed his eyes again. But this time, the stillness wasn't surrender. It was patience. He had waited his whole life for moments like this, moments when history bent under the weight of truth, and now, 5 minutes after being forced from his rightful place, the reckoning had already begun. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and unchanging. To most, it was background noise. To Jordan, it sounded like a countdown. And, deep inside, he knew the airline had just made the most expensive mistake of its existence. Jordan sat still, but his mind wasn't still at all. The hum of the engines carried him backward through years, down roads he thought he'd long left behind. He wasn't on flight 927 anymore, he was 10 again, riding the Greyhound through the back roads of Texas with his mother beside him. He could still see her pressed against the window, her Sunday dress neat but faded, her back straight even when her eyes were tired. The bus had been crowded that day. A group of white passengers boarded in the next town, their voices loud, their laughter sharp. The driver stopped, looked down the aisle, and barked for Jordan's mother to move. Seats up front are needed. Y'all need to shift back. He remembered his small hands clenching around the worn strap of his school satchel. He remembered his mother's pause, how every second stretched. Then she stood, gathered her purse, and guided him gently to the rear, past rows of watching eyes, some sympathetic, some indifferent, some satisfied. That night, he asked her why. Her answer had carried the weight of generations, because sometimes survival means moving. But one day, son, you'll be in a position where you won't have to. And when that day comes, you'll stand. Her words had lived inside him, quiet but unyielding, like roots beneath soil. And here he was, decades later, moved again from his rightful place. Only this time, he wasn't a boy clutching a satchel. He was a man who built something powerful enough to shake entire industries. His chest tightened. This wasn't just about a seat. It never was. A cough from the row across pulled him back to the present. A middle-aged man in a blazer leaned forward slightly, speaking low so the crew wouldn't hear. I saw it. You had the right ticket. That wasn't right. Jordan inclined his head in thanks. He didn't need the validation, but it mattered. Every witness mattered. Further up the aisle, Maya Ortiz's phone glowed as she whispered to her live stream. They made him move. Look at him calm, quiet. But you can see it. Something's happening. People in the comments are furious. Hashtag Seat 1A is everywhere. Jordan didn't look back at her camera, but he knew this wasn't confined to the walls of the plane anymore. The world outside was already watching, already choosing sides. He slipped a hand into his jacket pocket, brushing against the edge of a photograph he always carried. Anna and Maya, smiling in front of the oak tree in their backyard. His daughter's braces had just come off when it was taken, her grin wide, her eyes unguarded. He kept that picture with him not as a talisman, but as a reminder. Everything he did, every fight he chose, was tied to them. For a brief moment, a pang of doubt pierced him. Was this fight worth it? The stress, the scrutiny, the storm he knew was forming, did he want to bring that to his family's doorstep again? He had already lived through death threats when Maxwell Biotech exposed corruption in pharmaceutical pricing. He had endured nights where Anna lay awake beside him, listening to anonymous calls ring their house phone. Did he have the right to put them through another fire? The thought coiled tight, almost convincing him to let it slide, to take the indignity, sit quietly, and go home. Then he remembered Maya's words after her first high school debate win. She had come off stage, flushed with victory, telling him, "Dad, I didn't back down, even when they rolled their eyes, and you taught me that." The ache inside him hardened into resolve. He whispered under his breath, so low no one else could hear, "I can't let her see me back down." At the front of the cabin, Gregory Harlan's laughter broke the tension. He clinked his champagne glass against the armrest, amused by a joke only he seemed to understand. Linda Hayes hovered nearby, her posture protective, as if shielding a VIP guest. To her, Jordan had already been erased from the equation. He was just another problem shuffled away. But Linda didn't see the way passengers were watching. She didn't hear the clicks of cameras capturing her every dismissive glance. She didn't know the clips were already stitched together online, painting her as the face of arrogance and discrimination. Jordan's phone buzzed once in his lap. He opened the encrypted message. Ethan had sent him a preview from the audit. One file caught his eye immediately: internal correspondence showing Linda's name attached to special seating requests. Another document revealed a payment entry, $7,500, transferred into a personal account just days earlier. He didn't react outwardly, but inside, his pulse steadied. The pieces were falling where they needed to. A flight attendant approached, her expression polite but uneasy. She bent low. "Would you like something to drink, Mr. Maxwell?" Her whisper carried respect Linda had refused to show. Jordan's eyes met hers. She was young, maybe late 20s, freckles across her nose, a badge that read Claire Donovan. He nodded. "Just water. Thank you." As she walked away, he noticed how she glanced nervously toward Linda before filling the request. Even among the staff, there were fractures people caught between obeying orders and knowing what was right. The silence in the cabin grew heavier. Some passengers tapped anxiously at their phones. Others exchanged whispers. A man in the back muttered, "This is going to be on the news tonight. Mark my words." Jordan sat straighter. He wasn't sure yet how the next hours would unfold, but he knew this much: it would not end in silence. He thought again of his mother, of that bus ride, and realized with startling clarity this was the moment she had spoken of. The moment to stand, not for himself alone, but for everyone who had ever been told to move, to wait, to know their place. He closed his eyes, inhaled slowly, and exhaled. The engines droned steady beneath him, but to Jordan it sounded like a drumbeat, a pulse carrying him toward something inevitable. When he opened his eyes again, the doubt was gone. What remained was purpose, and purpose, Jordan knew, was far more dangerous to his enemies than anger ever could be. The cabin felt too quiet, not the quiet of calm, but of tension stretched tight, ready to snap. Jordan could sense it in the way people shifted in their seats, how their eyes darted toward him and then away again, as if afraid of being caught watching. He sat with his hands resting lightly on his knees, his posture steady, his face unreadable. Inside, though, his mind was calculating every movement, every whisper, every phone raised toward him like an unblinking witness. Maya Ortiz's live stream continued in the background, her voice rising with controlled urgency. "There he is, Mr. Maxwell. He's just sitting there, calm as ever. You can feel it, can't you? Something's coming. They think they silenced him, but I don't think they have any idea who they're dealing with." Comments scrolled so quickly across her screen they blurred into a river of outrage, disbelief, and solidarity. Thousands of viewers were already dissecting what had happened, many recognizing Jordan's name, attaching his story to broader headlines about racial bias. The murmurs inside the plane grew louder. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband and whispered too loudly, "If he paid for the seat, why move him? It's just wrong." Her husband nodded, glancing nervously toward Linda Hayes at the front of the cabin. Linda herself paced with a clipboard in hand, pretending to check details, but her lips were tight, her eyes sharp. She noticed the phones, the whispers, and for the first time a flicker of unease crossed her face. She had handled passengers before late arrivals, drunken arguments, seat mix-ups, but this was different. The silence of respect she expected hadn't come. Instead, the room buzzed with the electricity of discontent. Jordan leaned back, his voice low but firm as he spoke to the man seated next to him. "They think this is just a seat, but it's never just a seat, is it?" The man hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sir, it isn't." Jordan closed his eyes again, and the faces of his mother and daughter returned in his mind like anchors. His chest rose and fell in a deliberate rhythm. He wouldn't raise his voice. He wouldn't lash out. The truth was louder than any outburst. At the front, Gregory Harlan shifted in his new throne. He had ordered a second glass of champagne, smirking at the murmurs but unconcerned. To him, the whispers of other passengers meant nothing. He was untouchable. He had money, status, and people like Linda who bent rules in his favor. He glanced back once at Jordan with a look that said, "You see, this is how the world works. Accept it." But even Gregory couldn't feel the shift building beneath the surface. Claire Donovan returned with Jordan's water, her hand trembling slightly as she set it on the tray. She leaned closer than necessary. Her voice, a whisper meant only for him. "I'm sorry for what happened. I wanted you to know some of us don't agree." Jordan's eyes softened. "Thank you," he said simply. He didn't need her to take a stand now. It was enough to know that cracks were forming even among the crew. Minutes passed, but the tension didn't ease. It thickened. Passengers whispered. Phones buzzed. Even the hum of the engines seemed heavier, as though carrying the weight of what had just unfolded. Then a sound broke through. From row 12, a voice rose, steady and clear. "Excuse me?" the speaker said loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "Did I just watch a man get removed from his paid seat because someone else wanted it?" Heads turned. The speaker was a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a smart blazer. She stood, her carry-on still tucked neatly under the seat. "That's not how this works. If you pay for a seat, it's yours. This isn't right." Linda Hayes stiffened. "Ma'am, please sit down. The matter has already been resolved." But the woman didn't sit. "No, it hasn't. We all saw what happened. And if this is how your airline treats paying customers, then we all have a problem." A ripple of agreement spread through the rows. Someone clapped softly, then stopped, uncertain. But the dam had cracked. Another passenger muttered, "She's right." Jordan didn't rise, didn't add his voice. He let the moment bloom on its own. This was bigger than him now. Linda's face flushed. She raised her chin, her voice cold. "If passengers continue to disrupt, security will be called again." Her words landed with a dull thud. Even those who had been silent now exchanged incredulous looks. Security for asking why a black man had been displaced for a white elite member. The optics, the injustice, it was too blatant. Maya Ortiz whispered into her phone, excitement lacing her tone. "You see this? They're standing up. People are standing up." Her comment section exploded with encouragement. Thousands urging passengers to keep pushing back. Jordan's phone buzzed again. Another encrypted message from Ethan. This one was longer payment logs traced, clear evidence of bribe to Linda Hayes from Gregory Harlan. Internal email flagged, "Don't want people like him in VIP. More to come." Jordan exhaled slowly, his hand tightening around the phone. It was happening. The proof was lining up, undeniable and damning. He glanced at Claire, who stood nervously near the galley, and for a moment their eyes locked. She saw the calm steel in his gaze and knew something larger was unfolding. In the back, the woman who had spoken earlier finally sat, but not before adding, I'll be reporting this to the press if nothing changes. This won't be hidden." Jordan let the words hang in the air. He didn't need to be the one raising his voice. Others were doing it now, propelled by conscience, by outrage, by a sense that they had witnessed something profoundly wrong. Gregory sipped his champagne again, still convinced of his invulnerability. Linda hovered, trying to project authority, but her hands fidgeted at her clipboard. She was beginning to sense it. Control was slipping. Jordan shifted in his seat, took a sip of water, and set the glass down gently. He whispered again, this time not to himself, but to the storm forming around him. 5 minutes, he said softly, a mantra only he understood. 5 minutes, and the truth will speak louder than any of us. Outside the cabin, invisible to passengers, notifications buzzed on journalists' phones across the country. Screens lit up in newsrooms. Editors clicked into trending tags, and with every passing second, the story of Seat 1A pulled more eyes, more outrage, more voices ready to echo what Jordan's mother had told him long ago when the day comes. Stand. And now, strangers were standing for him, even before he moved a muscle. The first real crack came not from Jordan, not from the passengers who had already spoken, but from someone no one expected. A young man in uniform, an off-duty security officer, rose from row 16. His name was Daniel Cooper, though at that moment no one knew him. He spoke with the steady weight of someone who'd seen too much of the wrong thing before. "Ma'am," he addressed Linda Hayes, with respect, "you're escalating this the wrong way. This man did nothing but sit in the seat he paid for. That's not disruption. That's discrimination. And I can testify to that if you call security again." A stunned hush swept through the cabin. Linda froze, her eyes narrowing. But the balance of the room had shifted once more. It wasn't just murmurs now, it was testimony, authority, a voice backed by the credibility of uniform and profession. Gregory Harlan shifted uncomfortably in his reclined seat, champagne glass hovering at his lips. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but his words carried less weight than before. A few passengers even turned to look at him with disdain. Jordan didn't move, didn't speak. He simply met Cooper's gaze for a moment and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of courage. Claire Donovan. Her hands clasped tightly, felt the courage of the room pressing on her chest. She had been trained to obey the hierarchy, to defer to supervisors, but what she was witnessing went against everything her own conscience whispered. She drew a slow breath, then stepped forward. "Mr. Maxwell," she said quietly, but loud enough for passengers in the first rows to hear. "I know you booked seat 1A. I saw the manifest myself this morning." Gasps rippled. Gregory's smirk faltered. Linda spun toward her, fury sharp in her voice. "Claire, that's enough." But Claire pressed on, her words trembling but resolute. "I can't stay quiet. It was wrong. Everyone here deserves to know the truth." The cabin erupted into low voices, murmurs rising into outrage. Phones rose higher. Every word was recorded, transmitted, dissected in real time by thousands outside the plane. Jordan lifted his glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it back down. Inside, he could feel the rhythm of the moment aligning with everything Ethan had been sending him. Truth was surfacing, not just through data, but through conscience. Linda's face was flushed red, her authority unraveling. "Enough, everyone sit down and remain silent, or we'll be forced to." She didn't finish. The captain's voice boomed over the intercom, strained but professional. "This is Captain Reynolds. I've been informed of a developing situation in the cabin. We will not be taking off until this is resolved. Please remain seated." All eyes turned forward. Jordan could almost feel the weight of the captain's decision pressing down. A pause this long was costly. Every airline executive knew delays bled money. This wasn't just about one seat anymore, it was about the company itself. Gregory, his composure cracking, snapped, "For God's sake, just move him back. We have places to be. This is why first class should be for people who belong here." The words cut through the cabin like a knife. Gasps, then silence, then a low, angry murmur that grew louder, rolling like thunder. A passenger 3 rows back shouted, "Did you hear that?" That's the truth they've been hiding. Phones zoomed in, capturing Gregory's flushed, dismissive face. The live comments surged into rage. Maya Ortiz, her hand trembling as she held her phone, whispered fiercely into her stream, "You heard it. Everyone heard it. This isn't about a seat. This is about who they think deserves dignity." Jordan lowered his gaze, letting the words echo. His mother's voice came back again. "You'll know the moment when silence becomes complicity." He knew. The moment had arrived, slowly, deliberately. He stood, his height, his composure, his stillness drew every eye. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I won't be moved," he said simply, his voice carrying through the cabin like a bell. "Not from this seat, not from my place, not anymore." It was the calmest declaration, but it struck like thunder. The cabin filled with applause, first hesitant, then rolling and unrelenting. Passengers clapped. Some even stood in their rows, their solidarity undeniable. Gregory's face burned. Linda stammered, clipboard shaking in her hands, but it was too late. The tide had turned. Jordan sat again, folding his hands in his lap, breathing evenly. 5 minutes, that's all it had taken. 5 minutes from humiliation to transformation. Behind him, Daniel Cooper muttered to no one in particular, "That's how history shifts." Right there, but the shift wasn't over. Ethan's final message came through Jordan's phone, a single line that made his pulse quicken. "Audit complete, payments confirmed, systemic pattern uncovered, check your email." Jordan opened the file, scanning line after line of evidence transactions, emails, flight records all pointing to a culture of quiet bribes and louder prejudice. His legal team would have enough to not just fight this incident, but to hold the airline accountable for years of discrimination. His seat, his silence, his refusal, it had all crystallized into evidence and momentum. Linda Hayes tried once more, her voice shrill now, desperate. "If you don't cooperate, you'll be blacklisted from this airline permanently." Jordan turned to her, his eyes steady, his words measured. "Then blacklist me. But know this, you won't be blacklisting just me. You'll be blacklisting every truth-teller who refuses to move. And the world is watching." Phones captured every word. The live stream spiked to over 100,000 viewers. The hashtags multiplied. Ruth, seat 1A, not moving, Maxwell. Jordan leaned back in his seat, calm once more. He had lit the spark. The fire would spread. The applause didn't fade right away. It lingered, filling the cabin like a declaration that everyone had heard and chosen to stand behind. Jordan remained seated, his eyes steady, while around him strangers became allies, their clapping and murmurs weaving into a kind of shield. Gregory Harlan slammed his champagne flute onto the armrest. liquid splashing across his sleeve. "This is absurd," he barked. "You people don't understand how things work. That seat is mine. I've paid for this airline more times over than anyone here." His words only drew glares. A man in business casual leaned forward from row 3. "You think money makes you the owner of dignity?" He booked that seat. That should have been the end of it. The tension rolled like a wave. Linda Hayes clutched her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, another passenger rose. It was a young black woman in her 20s, wearing a neat blazer and carrying a briefcase. Her voice was clear and firm. "My name is Alicia Reynolds. I'm a civil rights attorney," she said, "and I can tell you now, every second this incident continues is another nail in this airline's coffin. You've created a hostile, discriminatory environment. You've violated contractual agreements with a paying customer, and you're doing it in front of hundreds of witnesses with phones recording." Linda froze, her face pale. Gregory muttered a curse under his breath. Jordan turned his head slightly, studying Alicia. She hadn't looked at him directly, but the fire in her voice carried the weight of something more than law. It was conviction. He gave her a subtle nod, one professional to another, a recognition of solidarity. The murmurs grew louder again, stronger this time. Someone shouted from the back, "Put him back in his seat. Do the right thing." Another added, "We're not taking off until you fix this." Jordan's phone buzzed in his palm. Ethan's next message read, "Media is on fire. CNN and NYT already running with the live stream. Trending's #1 seat 1A. It's exploding." He allowed himself a quiet breath. The fire was spreading faster than even he had imagined. Captain Reynolds's voice returned over the intercom, strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're working to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. Your patience is appreciated." But patience was gone. The passengers weren't passive anymore. Gregory stood halfway, pointing at Jordan with a trembling finger. "This man doesn't belong here. He's playing the race card to humiliate all of us." The silence after those words was deafening. Even Linda's face showed a flicker of shock. Gregory had said the quiet part loud, the prejudice too raw to hide. A wave of anger swept through the cabin. Alicia Reynolds turned on him instantly. "You just confirmed exactly what this is about. Not money, not procedure, race, and you've put it in words no one can deny." Gregory's mouth opened, then shut again. For the first time, his confidence cracked. Jordan sat motionless, but inside he felt something shift. The ugliness had revealed itself in plain sight, the very thing he had endured silently for years, quiet dismissals. Subtle slights was now shouted into the open where the world could see. And it wasn't just his burden anymore. Everyone in the cabin had witnessed it, and they would carry that truth forward. Linda Hayes, her voice brittle, tried one last maneuver. "Mr. Maxwell, if you refuse to comply, you will be reported and banned from future flights. We are authorized to..." Before she could finish, Daniel Cooper rose again. His badge hung visible from his belt. "You're done here, ma'am. You're making threats on record. I'll be submitting a full report. If you don't stop now, I'll call in federal marshals myself." The shock on Linda's face was almost comical. Her authority, once absolute in the cabin, had evaporated. The crew behind her shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Claire Donovan looked ready to cry, but didn't step back. For the first time, she didn't look afraid. Maya Ortiz whispered fiercely into her phone. "You're watching history. This is how it changes in a cabin, in real time." Her comment section swelled into hundreds of thousands. The hum of the aircraft seemed to deepen. Outside, baggage carts paused. A ground crew member looked up, phone in hand, already reading the storm erupting online. Jordan leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but caring to those nearest him. "This seat was mine. You tried to take it, not because of error, not because of money, but because you didn't want me here. I stayed because my daughter needs to know her father doesn't bow to prejudice, and because every person who's ever been told to move for someone else deserves to see that we have a choice." His words rippled through the cabin like a sermon, quiet yet undeniable. More applause rose, stronger this time, defiant. Gregory dropped back into his seat, his arrogance crumbling into red-faced silence. Linda looked cornered, every option closed. Jordan's phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan FAA alerted, "Dot oversight inbound. Skylux executives in emergency call now. Stay calm." Jordan exhaled slowly, almost a prayer. The gears of accountability were turning. Suddenly, Claire Donovan stepped forward again, her voice trembling but resolute. "I can't serve under this anymore. I'm done." She pulled her crew badge from her pocket and set it on the counter near Linda. The passengers gasped. Claire's hand shook, but her eyes were clear. "You can take my job, but you can't take my dignity, and I won't stand here watching you destroy someone else's." The cabin erupted in cheers. Not polite applause, but the kind of visceral sound that came when people witnessed courage. Linda's face burned scarlet, her clipboard trembling. Gregory muttered something unintelligible, staring out the window as though the glass would save him. For a moment, Jordan closed his eyes. He thought of his daughter Maya, of the world she was inheriting. This was why he stayed seated. Not for him, but for them. For all of them. And somewhere deep inside, he felt his mother's voice echo again. "Stand. Even if you're sitting down. Stand where it matters most." The cabin had become something no one could control anymore. Linda Hayes stood stiff, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield that no longer worked. Gregory Harlan, once so smug, now sat rigid and silent, his cheeks burning as the weight of hundreds of eyes pressed against him. Jordan Maxwell remained calm, seated in 2B, his body a study in stillness, while around him the air buzzed with tension, outrage, and something else, unity. The captain's door opened with a metallic click. For the first time, Captain Reynolds stepped into the cabin. His tall frame carried authority, but there was a tired heaviness in his posture, the kind that came from years of choosing what was expedient rather than what was right. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on Jordan before flicking briefly toward Gregory and Linda. "We're at a standstill," Reynolds said, his voice projecting down the aisle. "We can't leave this gate until this situation is resolved. Every minute we delay costs this airline money, costs passengers time. I need to know, right now, where we stand." Before Linda could speak, Alicia Reynolds, the attorney, rose again. "Captain, with respect, where we stand is obvious." A paying passenger was removed from his seat under discriminatory circumstances. Multiple witnesses, including myself, have recorded the incident. If this flight leaves without correction, this airline will face not only lawsuits, but a storm the likes of which you've never seen. Murmurs of agreement surged. Phones tilted higher. Reynolds looked at Linda, his face hard. "Is it true?" Linda's lips parted, then closed. She searched for words, but the silence stretched too long. Claire Donovan's voice cut through it. "It's true. I saw the manifest. Mr. Maxwell booked 1A. Supervisor Hayes gave it away." The words landed like a hammer. Passengers erupted in anger, some shouting, some applauding Claire, others demanding answers. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. When he opened them, his decision was written across his face. He turned toward Jordan. "Mr. Maxwell," he said quietly but firmly, "please take your original seat." The eruption of applause nearly shook the cabin walls. Phones flashed. Maya Ortiz whispered into her live stream, "He's going back. Justice is happening. You're watching history." Jordan didn't move immediately. He rose slowly, every step deliberate, the applause washing over him. When he reached 1A, he placed a hand lightly on the headrest, paused, then looked back at the passengers. His voice was calm, steady. "This was never just about me," he said. "This was about everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Remember this moment, because it's yours, too." Then he sat. In the seat that had been his all along, Gregory slumped deeper, his face twisted with something between rage and shame. Linda's hands shook around her clipboard. The captain gave a final nod and returned to the cockpit. The engines rumbled, preparing once more for departure. But for Jordan, the real takeoff had already happened. His phone buzzed again. Ethan's message glowed. "Emergency board meeting scheduled. Evidence package delivered to DOT, FAA, and press. You're live on every major network." Jordan leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He thought of Maya, his daughter, sitting in her dorm room, watching him on a glowing screen. He thought of his mother's voice. He thought of Anna's steady encouragement. And then he thought of every person who'd been forced to move, silenced, dismissed. The ripple was theirs. Passengers continued buzzing as the plane finally began its taxi. Alicia sat down again, her hand resting firmly on her briefcase, eyes glinting with satisfaction. Daniel Cooper, the off-duty officer, leaned back, arms crossed, his silent presence a shield. Claire Donovan, badge surrendered, looked almost lighter now, like someone who had just chosen her soul over her paycheck. Linda Hayes remained rigid at the galley, but her authority had dissolved into dust. Every glance from passengers was judgment. Every whisper was condemnation. 5 minutes, that was all it had taken. The aircraft lifted into the sky, but the story had already left the cabin long before the wheels left the ground. Screens across America filled with Jordan's face, his calm words, the image of him returning to seat 1A. News anchors scrambled to provide context. Civil rights leaders tweeted support. Hashtags exploded. In that cabin, though, it was strangely quiet, not peaceful, but the quiet of people realizing they had witnessed something larger than themselves. Jordan sat in silence, but inside, his thoughts churned. He knew this was only the beginning. He knew the airline's executives would scramble, that Gregory would call in favors, that Linda would lie, but he also knew the truth was now too big to contain. The whole world had seen it. He turned his gaze toward the window, the city lights below shrinking as the plane climbed. His reflection stared back, calm, steady, resolute. He whispered, so softly only he could hear, "I'm not moving." The seat was his. The moment was theirs. And the future was just beginning. The hum of the engines filled the cabin. but no one could mistake it for peace. Beneath the sound of flight, there was a tension that hadn't dissipated, only shifted. Passengers whispered in hushed voices, scrolling through their phones, watching the world outside catch fire over what had happened inside seat 1A. Jordan Maxwell leaned back against the headrest, hands folded neatly in his lap. To anyone passing by, he looked like a man simply enjoying his rightful seat. But behind his calm eyes, his mind worked like a clock. Every message from Ethan Clark ticked into place. Every headline flashing across his phone another cog in a machine larger than the plane itself. Across the aisle, Alicia Reynolds was already drafting legal notes, her briefcase open on her lap. She wasn't a woman who let moments like this vanish into the noise of outrage. She captured details, names, times, building the skeleton of a case that would live long after the flight landed. Further back, Daniel Cooper sat silently, his frame tense but his eyes watchful. He was off duty, but anyone looking at him could tell he wasn't done protecting. Maya Ortiz still whispered into her phone, her live stream steady. For those just joining, yes, it's real. Jordan Maxwell, the CEO you've read about, just got his seat back after being thrown out for a Platinum Elite passenger. And yes, the supervisor and that passenger, it's all recorded. You can't make this up. Claire Donovan sat in the jump seat near the galley, her uniform neat but badge gone. She stared down at her hands, trembling from what she had done. But in her chest was a surprising quiet. She had chosen the truth. For the first time, she felt like a flight attendant who had truly served her passengers, not just her employer. And Linda Hayes, her authority stripped, stood rigid, eyes darting to the floor. The clipboard in her hands was useless now, her notes meaningless against the tide of witnesses and evidence. She knew what awaited her on the ground: questions, reports, maybe worse. The humiliation of losing control weighed on her heavier than any turbulence could. Jordan's phone buzzed again. Ethan's message was concise: emergency suspension of Hayes imminent. Leaks confirm Gregory's payments to multiple supervisors. Press is circling. Prepare statement. Jordan exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. He knew the next phase was beginning. What had started as a single act of discrimination had become systemic exposure. Gregory Harlan, for all his bravado earlier, now sat hunched in his seat. His arrogance had drained away, leaving a man who looked cornered. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolling furiously, no doubt searching for lawyers, for allies, for anyone who could spin the disaster he had triggered. But spin could not erase the sound of his voice shouting race card. It was captured, replayed, dissected by millions already. Jordan watched him out of the corner of his eye. He didn't hate him. He didn't even pity him. He simply understood what Gregory symbolized: a system that believed money could buy not just privilege, but dignity itself. And that system was crumbling under the weight of a single refusal. Passengers began to speak to one another now, no longer whispering. A businessman in row 5 leaned forward, telling the woman across the aisle, "I've traveled for years. I've seen it. People of color get treated differently all the time. Today, we all saw it plain as day." The woman nodded, her voice carrying, "And maybe now, finally, it'll change, because someone didn't move." The words echoed toward Jordan, though they weren't directed at him. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. This was what he wanted: not just sympathy for himself, but awakening in others. The seatbelt sign dinged off. People stood to stretch, yet eyes kept drifting toward him. He remained still, his composure a quiet center in the storm. Then Alicia Reynolds leaned slightly across the aisle, her tone professional but warm. "Mr. Maxwell, when this plane lands, you're not just a passenger anymore. You're a plaintiff, whether you like it or not. And this case will shake the industry." Jordan studied her, then gave a small nod. "I never wanted a case. I wanted respect. But maybe one brings the other." Her lips curved faintly. "Sometimes it does." From the back, Maya Ortiz whispered to her stream again. "Did you hear that he's not just fighting for himself? He's fighting for all of us." The cabin door to the cockpit cracked open again. Captain Reynolds stepped out, his face taut. He approached Jordan quietly, bending slightly so only those in the nearest rows could hear. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, voice low, "I want to apologize. What happened here under my watch was wrong. I can't erase it, but I can make sure the record reflects what truly occurred. You have my word." Jordan looked at him for a long moment, his eyes searching for sincerity. Then he inclined his head. "Thank you, Captain. It matters." Reynolds straightened, his eyes lingering on Linda Hayes before he returned to the cockpit. His silence toward her spoke louder than any reprimand. Gregory groaned under his breath, muttering words only he could hear. The man, who once commanded the cabin with his status, now looked like a relic of a fading era, one caught in the harsh light of truth. Jordan's phone buzzed once more. Ethan's final message of the hour press conference set for landing. "They want you at the podium. You don't have to speak, but you should." Jordan didn't answer. He only stared out the window, the vast stretch of sky reflecting back his own stillness. He thought of Maya, of what she might say when she called later. He thought of his mother's words, still echoing like scripture. And he thought of something else, how quickly a cabin had transformed into a courtroom, a stage, a pulpit, and how, in 5 minutes of injustice, dignity had become unstoppable. As the aircraft cut through the night sky, the cabin lights dimmed, but no one truly rested. Screens glowed everywhere, phones, tablets, seatback monitors, each one reflecting the storm outside. Passengers refreshed news feeds, whispering updates to each other. Every headline carried the same words, "Black CEO removed from VIP seat." Every image was Jordan Maxwell, calm and composed, reclaiming what was his. Jordan sat silently in 1A, the seat that had become more than leather and metal. It was a symbol now, carried by millions who saw themselves in his quiet defiance. He felt the hum of the engines under his palms as if the aircraft itself bore the weight of a story too heavy for the sky. Across the aisle, Alicia Reynolds tapped furiously on her laptop, her notes compiling into a legal map. She glanced up occasionally, meeting Jordan's steady gaze, and each time she did, her conviction deepened. She had argued cases before, but never one so raw, so visceral, one that carried the pulse of a nation midair. In the jump seat, Claire Donovan sat with her hands clasped tight. Her resignation had spread already, she knew it. Crew chat groups, airline management, maybe even the press. Fear flickered in her stomach, but above it was something purer relief. She had chosen truth, and that, no matter the consequences, was freedom. Daniel Cooper remained vigilant, his posture straight, his presence like a sentinel. He hadn't spoken since earlier, but his silence wasn't withdrawal, it was readiness. His eyes tracked Linda Hayes, who lingered stiffly at the galley, her authority stripped but her pride still clawing for purchase. Linda's phone buzzed in her pocket. She read a message quickly, her face draining of color. Jordan noticed. Watching from the corner of his eye, she turned away, but her shoulders tensed, her breath sharp. He knew the look. It was the look of someone who realized the system that had always protected them was suddenly retreating, leaving them exposed. Gregory Harlan still hunched in his seat, scrolling furiously, as if a lawyer or PR contact could reverse the tide. But the screen betrayed him, every article condemned him. Every clip replayed his words, his sneer, his entitlement. He had become a villain in real time, the face of prejudice caught under unforgiving light. Jordan's phone buzzed. Ethan Clark's message was brief but heavy. FBI interested. DOJ monitoring. Prepare for escalation. Jordan's pulse slowed. Escalation was inevitable. This wasn't just an airline's embarrassment anymore, it was a civil rights flashpoint. And he was at the center. The plane began its descent. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our approach. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." His tone was even. But underneath it, Jordan sensed something the captain knew what waited on the ground. As the wheels lowered with a groan, Alicia leaned toward Jordan, her voice firm but quiet. "The moment we step off this plane, everything changes. Media, lawyers, executives scrambling. They'll try to spin it, but the evidence is clear." Jordan nodded once, then let the truth stand taller than the spin. The plane touched down with a jolt, tires screeching against the runway. A ripple of breath moved through the cabin, passengers bracing for what they sensed too. This landing wasn't an ending. It was ignition. Taxiing toward the gate felt like an eternity. Out the windows, flashing lights cut across the dark tarmac, police vehicles, news vans beyond the barriers, the glow of cameras. Phones buzzed in every passenger's hand. Alerts poured in, breaking Maxwell incident sparks, national outcry. Airline under federal investigation. Haas Seat 1A tops global trends. Jordan sat still, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the window. Inside, his thoughts were a storm. He thought of Maya, his daughter, watching somewhere with tears in her eyes. He thought of his mother, her voice steady in his memory. He thought of Anna, his late wife, who had always believed his calm was his greatest strength. The seatbelt light dinged off. Passengers rose, but no one rushed the aisles. All eyes turned toward Jordan. It was unspoken he would leave first. The cabin door opened with a hiss. Floodlights from the jet bridge spilled inside, white and unrelenting. A wall of cameras waited beyond, flashes already exploding. Officials in dark suits stood at the threshold, faces taut. Linda Hayes hesitated near the galley, her clipboard now tucked under her arm like a lifeline. One of the officials gestured, and she stiffened, stepping reluctantly forward. Her authority had evaporated. She looked like someone walking toward judgment. Gregory tried to push past, but a police officer blocked him firmly. His protests were muffled by the noise of cameras, his status meaningless now. Then Jordan rose, slowly, deliberately. He stepped into the aisle, his posture tall, his movements unhurried. The cabin erupted in applause, not scattered, not hesitant, but thunderous. Passengers clapped, some standing, some with tears shining in their eyes. Phones captured every moment. Jordan paused at the threshold, the floodlights bright against his face. He looked back once, sweeping his gaze across the cabin. Thank you, he said simply, his voice carrying, for standing. Not just for me, but for what's right. The applause swelled again. Then he stepped forward into the jet bridge, into the blaze of cameras, into history. The jet bridge was blinding, flooded with light that turned every step into a performance. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones stretched out like grasping hands. The noise was overwhelming. Reporters shouting questions, passengers murmuring, officials trying and failing to control the chaos. Jordan Elias Maxwell walked forward with the same calm he had shown all night. His stride was measured, steady, every movement deliberate. He knew each second was being recorded, broadcast, dissected by millions. What had started as humiliation in a cabin seat had grown into something far bigger, a spectacle of justice unfolding in real time. Behind him, Alicia Reynolds followed with her briefcase, her eyes sharp. Daniel Cooper, tall and silent, stayed close, his presence a protective shadow. Claire Donovan emerged too, no longer hiding. The badge she had surrendered gone from her chest, but dignity written in her posture. Maya Ortiz held her phone high, her live stream exploding with comments as viewers screamed their solidarity in scrolling rivers of text. Linda Hayes stepped off the plane, pale and rigid, her clipboard tucked to her chest like a shield. The waiting officials moved toward her, their faces impassive, but their intent clear. She tried to keep her chin high, but her steps faltered under the crush of cameras. Gregory Harlan stumbled behind, his protests drowned in the noise, his expensive suit rumpled, his face red with fury. The crowd wasn't interested in him, they jeered, snapping photos of the man whose entitlement had been exposed. Jordan paused at the mouth of the terminal, where a row of microphones had been hastily assembled. He hadn't planned to speak, but the weight of the moment pressed against him. Reporters shouted his name, some pleading, some demanding, some desperate to be the first to broadcast his words. "Mr. Maxwell, do you believe this was racism? Will you sue Skylux Airlines? What message do you want to send to the public tonight?" Jordan raised a hand, and somehow, impossibly, the noise dimmed. The cameras still flashed, but voices quieted, as though the crowd itself knew that silence would give his words more power. He drew a slow breath. His mind flickered through memories, his daughter Maya, waiting for his call, his mother telling him to stand when the moment came. Anna, whose absence was still a wound, but whose spirit felt near in this instant. "This wasn't about a seat," Jordan said at last, his voice calm but resonant. "It was about dignity, about who is seen as worthy of respect and who is told to move." Reporters leaned forward. Flashes exploded. "I sat in that seat because I paid for it. But I stayed in that seat because too many before me have been told to stand up, step aside, give way. Tonight, I refused not for myself alone, but for my daughter, and for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong." A wave of applause broke out among the crowd behind the camera's passengers, airport staff, even strangers who had rushed to the terminal after watching the live stream. The sound was raw, uncontrolled, a surge of solidarity that cameras couldn't edit away. Jordan's gaze swept the crowd. To Skylux Airlines, and to every company watching, dignity is not optional. Respect is not a privilege for the wealthy or the powerful. It is the right of every human being who walks through your doors. Tonight, the world saw what happens when that truth is denied. Tomorrow, the world will decide what to do with it. He stepped back. He had said enough. Alicia Reynolds moved forward quickly, her voice sharp as she addressed the microphones. "I can confirm we are preparing legal action on behalf of Mr. Maxwell and potentially other victims of this systemic discrimination. What occurred tonight was not isolated, it was part of a pattern. And that pattern ends here." Reporters erupted again, but Jordan didn't speak further. He turned, moving with quiet grace toward the waiting officials. Daniel Cooper flanked him, scanning the crowd, while Claire Donovan trailed behind, looking both terrified and resolute. She knew her life had just changed forever. In the corner, Maya Ortiz whispered into her phone, tears streaking her cheeks. "You're seeing history." She told her audience of millions, "This isn't just a story, it's the start of something bigger." Security escorted Linda Hayes through a side door, cameras chasing her until she disappeared. Gregory Harlan, red-faced and shouting, was met by boos from the gathering crowd. For the first time in his life, money didn't open doors, it closed them. Jordan continued down the terminal, away from the noise, his phone buzzing again. Ethan Clark's message glowed on the screenboard suspended haze. "Gregory blacklisted. Doubt launch an investigation. You'll be called to testify. Proud of you." He slowed, his eyes on the message. Testify. The word felt heavy, but not frightening. It felt inevitable. As he stepped into a quieter corridor, away from the flashes and shouting, Jordan allowed himself a small, weary smile. He thought again of Maya, of the call he would make tonight. He pictured her face when she heard his voice and realized her father hadn't just kept his seat, he had turned it into something larger than both of them. The world outside was in uproar. Social media burned with hashtags. News anchors dissected every word. Politicians prepared statements. CEOs scheduled emergency calls. But in that brief moment, in the hush of the corridor, Jordan felt only one thing resolve. The battle had only begun. But he had already won the first war. The morning after the flight, the city woke to a storm. Screens in every cafe, every airport lounge, every living room replayed the same footage, Jordan Elias Maxwell standing at the terminal microphones, his voice calm yet resolute. Clips of Linda Hayes being led away, Gregory Harlan's red-faced protests, and the thunderous applause inside the terminal looped endlessly. News anchors described it as the Rosa Parks moment of modern aviation. Commentators debated the corporate implications. Activists celebrated. Critics fumed. Jordan sat at his kitchen table in his Chicago apartment, a cup of black coffee cool and untouched. He'd barely slept, the phone buzzing with calls from journalists, CEOs, even politicians. But in the quiet of dawn, he wanted nothing more than to hear Maya's voice. When she finally answered, groggy from the time difference on her college campus, her tone shifted from sleepy to alive the moment she heard his. "Dad, everyone here is talking about you. My professor showed your speech in class. People were crying. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I've never been so proud to say you're my father." The words pierced Jordan's exhaustion, warming him in a way no headline could. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "That's all I needed to hear. Sweetheart. Whatever happens next, it's worth it." But the next was already beginning. By mid-morning, Ethan Clark stormed into Jordan's office, his tie loose, eyes blazing with urgency. "It's chaos out there. Skylux stock dropped 12% overnight. Their board is scrambling. I've had calls from regulators, from the Department of Transportation. even from the White House Economic Council. Everyone wants to know where you stand." Jordan leaned back in his chair, the weight of responsibility settling on him. "Where I stand, I think I made that clear last night. The question is whether the country will stand with me." Ethan dropped a folder on the desk. "Then you need to see this. A coalition of shareholders is trying to downplay the incident. They're spinning it as a misunderstanding, saying Hayes was just following protocol and Gregory was an isolated bad apple. They want to minimize, not reform." Jordan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the carefully worded statements drafted by corporate lawyers. His jaw tightened. "Minimize dignity into a footnote. Not on my watch." Before Ethan could reply, Alicia Reynolds swept in, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her face was serious, her phone still lit with incoming messages. "Dot wants a formal complaint filed today. If you sign, they'll open a federal investigation. Without it, Skylux might contain this internally." Jordan studied her. "And if I do sign, we escalate to war. War was declared the moment they dragged you out of that seat," Alicia replied sharply. "The difference is whether you fight back or let them dictate the terms." The room fell silent. Jordan looked at the pen on his desk, then at the faces of the two people waiting. Ethan, pragmatic and driven; Alicia, fierce and uncompromising. His thoughts flickered to Anna, to Maya, to the generations before him who had been told to stand down. Slowly, he picked up the pen and signed, "File it," he said, "by afternoon." The announcement was everywhere. Federal investigation launched into Skylux Airlines following allegations of racial discrimination. The stock dipped further. Union leaders demanded meetings. Consumer advocacy groups called for boycotts, and in living rooms across America, families debated what it all meant. Not everyone was pleased. In a quiet office on the top floor of a downtown tower, Gregory Harlan met with his lawyers, rage etched into every line of his face. "He humiliated me." Gregory spat, on camera, in front of the world. "I won't let this stand." His attorney, cautious, suggested patience. But Gregory's pride was a fuse already lit. Meanwhile, Linda Hayes sat in a corporate interrogation room, her supervisor grilling her for details. She insisted she'd followed protocol, that Gregory had pressured her, that she was being scapegoated. Yet the leaked break room recordings painted a damning picture of systemic prejudice. The airline was cornered. Jordan, however, had no time to savor their unraveling. That evening, he attended a town hall meeting organized by community leaders. The auditorium was filled with activists, students, business owners, ordinary citizens who had seen themselves in his refusal to move. The energy was electric. Every seat taken, every aisle crowded. Dorothy Henderson, the civil rights elder who had marched in Selma decades earlier, introduced him with words that carried the weight of history. "Last night, Mr. Maxwell kept his seat. Tonight, he gives us all one." Jordan stepped to the podium, looking out at faces lit with hope and anger alike. "I didn't ask for this fight," he began, his voice steady, "but I won't run from it. What happened on Flight 227 wasn't just about me. It was about every passenger ever told they didn't belong, every worker afraid to speak truth, every child who wonders if the world will see them as equal." The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, some weeping. Jordan raised a hand for quiet. "We can't settle for apologies written by lawyers. We can't settle for training sessions that check a box. We need structural change. And that starts now. He outlined his vision: independent oversight boards, zero-tolerance policies for discrimination, passenger advocates on every flight. As he spoke, the crowd leaned in, nodding, murmuring agreement. The ideas were bold, unprecedented, but the moment demanded no less. Afterward, as he left the stage, a young girl no older than 12 approached, clutching her mother's hand. Her eyes were wide, her voice trembling. "Mr. Maxwell, I want to be a pilot someday, but I was scared people wouldn't let me. Now I think maybe they will." Jordan crouched, meeting her gaze. "Not maybe," he said gently. "Definitely. And when you sit in that cockpit, remember, you belong there." Her smile was small but radiant, and it followed him long after he left the auditorium. Back at his apartment, late that night, Jordan stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. Patricia slipped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back. "You lit a fire," she murmured. "Now it's spreading." He sighed, the weight of it heavy but not unwelcome. "Fires can warm or they can burn. I just hope this one builds something better." Patricia turned him gently, her eyes searching his. "You've carried heavier hopes before. You'll carry this one too." He kissed her forehead, but his thoughts lingered on the battles ahead: courtrooms, boardrooms, hearings, and headlines. The storm was only beginning, and he was at its center. But for the first time, he felt not alone, but surrounded by allies, by strangers, by history itself. 2 days later, Jordan stood at the edge of a long mahogany boardroom table inside Skylux's downtown headquarters. The room was all glass and steel, the skyline of Chicago stretching endlessly outside, but the air inside was heavy with tension. Skylux's directors had assembled in an emergency session, their voices hushed but sharp, their eyes darting toward the man whose presence they resented but could not ignore. Richard Lawson, the interim chairman, called the meeting to order. His voice was smooth, but his hands gripped the gavel too tightly. "We're here to discuss the crisis stemming from Flight 227 and the actions taken since. Mr. Maxwell, you've made your views very public, but this is not the media. This is the board. Convince us why we should not cut our losses and minimize this damage." Jordan rose slowly, buttoning his jacket, meeting the skeptical faces with a calm that unsettled them. "Cut your losses. You've already lost $2 billion in market value in 48 hours. What you're missing is that this isn't just financial damage. It's moral bankruptcy on display. You can't minimize this. You can only decide whether to bury yourselves in denial or lead the industry out of it." One director, an older man with silver hair and a sharp suit, leaned forward. "And you propose what, spending millions on reforms that alienate our most loyal premium passengers. The Gregory Harlans of the world pay our bills." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "The Gregory Harlans of the world also destroy your reputation. Last night's town hall drew millions of live viewers. Do you know what they were saying? Not that Skylux was luxurious, but that Skylux was toxic. You've lost the trust of everyday travelers. Without them, your airline collapses no matter how many platinum elites you coddle." Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard Lawson rapped the gavel lightly. "Let him finish." Jordan paced slowly, his voice steady but carrying the cadence of conviction. "Here's what I propose. First, audit every complaint from the last 10 years. Not the whitewash summaries, every file, every voice. Let the truth guide the reforms. Second, establish an independent passenger advocate on every flight, empowered to override crew decisions when bias is evident. Third, enshrine zero tolerance for discrimination into your corporate charter so it cannot be erased by future boards. Fourth, invest in a diversity initiative not as charity, but as strategy. Show the world you're not just repairing an image, you're building a new one. The silver-haired director scoffed. Do you know how expensive that would be? Jordan's voice cut sharp. More expensive than losing another $2 billion in a week. More expensive than becoming the symbol of corporate racism in every headline. This isn't expense. This is survival. Silence fell. The director shifted uneasily. For the first time, Jordan saw hesitation soften their hardened expressions. From the far end of the table, Helen Costa, one of the few directors who had shown genuine curiosity before, spoke softly but firmly. He's right. If we lead, we can redefine the industry. If we resist, we'll be left behind. It's that simple. Lawson sighed, rubbing his temples. We'll put it to a vote. 8 in favor, 4 against, 1 abstention. The gavel struck. The reforms passed. Jordan exhaled slowly, but his relief was short-lived. As the directors filed out, Lawson lingered. His face was drawn, but his voice was low. You know, some of them hate you for this. Maxwell, you've embarrassed them, forced their hand. They'll look for ways to undermine you. Jordan allowed himself a tight smile. Good. Comfortable people don't change anything. That night, he returned home to find Patricia waiting with dinner, but the weight of the day lingered. They sat together at the table, the television in the background replaying clips of his boardroom speech. Patricia reached across, resting her hand on his. You've turned a moment into a movement, Jordan, but movements draw enemies. He nodded, weary but resolute. I know, and they're already making their move. As if summoned by his words, his phone buzzed with a message from Alicia Reynolds. He opened it to find a video file, recorded in what looked like Skylux's break room. Employees laughed, their words dripping with disdain. Grant got what he deserved. One said, "These people always play the race card." Another sneered, "Jessica shouldn't have been fired. We were just keeping the cabin comfortable for our regular passengers." Jordan stopped the video, fury simmering but contained. He forwarded it to Richard Lawson with a single line. Your culture problem is deeper than you think. Minutes later, Lawson called, his voice shaken. Jesus Christ. I'll find out who these people are. We'll fire them. No, Jordan interrupted. Firing them isn't the point. They're saying what many believe but are now too scared to admit. This isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. You need to change minds, not just policies. And how do you propose we do that? Lawson demanded. Make it personal. Bring in voices who've lived it. Let your employees hear what bias costs in human terms. Let them understand they're part of a continuum. They need to see that silence is complicity. Lawson hesitated. And you'll speak. Jordan shook his head, though Lawson couldn't see it. No, I'm the villain in their narrative now. They won't hear me, but they'll hear Dorothy Henderson. Let her tell them about being beaten for sitting in the wrong section of a bus. Let them connect the dots. That night, Jordan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Patricia stirred beside him, sensing his restlessness. She wrapped her arms around him. Can't turn it off, can you? He exhaled. Preston Chambers is calling every black passenger Skylux has ever upgraded. trying to paint me as someone who got special treatment and threw a tantrum when I didn't get it this time. Patricia turned him gently to face her. You knew it would get ugly. They always attack the messenger when they can't disprove the message. I know. His voice broke slightly. I think of the people watching, hoping I'll win because they can't fight their own battles. What if I fail them? You won't, she said firmly, because you've never failed anyone who counted on you. Not me, not Maya, not your employees. You'll find a way. You always do. The next morning proved her right. The fallout was already spiraling. Skylux's staff whispering rebellion. Hostile shareholders buying stock quietly. Bradley Whitfield's name emerging behind Fortress Capital's aggressive play. Jordan saw the pattern forming a counteroffensive designed not just to stop him, but to erase everything he had built. But as he buttoned his jacket and prepared for the storm, he thought of Maya's voice the night before, trembling with pride. That memory steadied him. He would fight not just for himself, but for her. For every young girl dreaming of a cockpit. For every passenger tired of being told to move. The war was shifting from cabins to boardrooms, from seats to stock prices, but Jordan Elias Maxwell was ready. The week stretched long, every hour heavy with headlines. Skylux Airlines had become the epicenter of a cultural reckoning. But beneath the public outrage and boardroom votes, another battle was forming in the shadows. Jordan Elias Maxwell could feel it. He noticed it in the clipped tone of emails that used to be warm, in the corporate handshakes that lingered a fraction too short, in the sudden coldness of executives who had smiled at him just days before. Skylux wasn't just reforming, it was resisting, and resistance often wore a polished mask. Late Monday evening. Ethan Clark strode into Jordan's office, his face grim. He tossed a file onto the desk. Fortress Capital. They've doubled their stake in Skylux overnight. Jordan's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the pages. Fortress Capital, the aggressive hedge fund led by Bradley Whitfield. The name alone made his stomach tighten. Bradley was infamous for gutting companies under the guise of shareholder value. He wasn't buying in to save Skylux, he was buying leverage to weaponize against reform. They'll push for a proxy battle, Ethan continued. They'll claim you're destabilizing the company, that your reforms are costing billions. If they win, they'll roll everything back. Jordan leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Bradley always plays the long con. He's not just after Skylux, he's after the message. If they can break me here, it'll send a signal to every board in America that change isn't worth the risk. Ethan nodded grimly. And they've already started whispering campaigns, leaks to the press suggesting you're doing this for personal power, articles about your wealth, your house in Lakeview, even Patricia's background. They're trying to make you the villain. Jordan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. Villainy,'s easier to sell than accountability, but we won't play defense. We make them answer for their silence. That night, he sat in his study at home, papers scattered across the desk, while Patricia curled on the couch, watching him with quiet concern. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. "I can't," Jordan muttered. "Every move matters now. Fortress is circling. If they get enough of the board on their side," Patricia stood, crossed the room, and set her hand on his shoulder. "You're not just fighting Fortress or Skylux. You're fighting for something bigger. Don't let them turn you into a machine. Don't lose the heart that makes people believe you." Her words struck deeper than she knew. Jordan looked down at a framed photo of Maya on his desk. He had chosen this fight for her future, not for headlines or power. He forced himself to push the papers aside and took Patricia's hand. "You're right. If I lose the heart, the message dies too." 2 days later, Alicia Reynolds called with news that tightened the noose further. "We've confirmed that Fortress is courting Gregory Harlan. He's given them statements, painting himself as the victim. Claims you humiliated him to grandstand. He's playing the class card, not just race. They're saying you weaponized your wealth to shame an ordinary loyal customer." Jordan almost laughed at the irony. Gregory Harlan. Ordinary that man's flown private jets since prep school. "Truth doesn't matter here," Alicia said sharply. "Perception does, and Fortress knows how to twist perception until it becomes reality." The next morning, a major newspaper ran an op-ed penned by Bradley Whitfield himself. The headline read, "Air travel should unite us, not divide us." In it, Bradley framed Jordan as a divisive figure, someone using personal grievance to ignite chaos, someone who risked destabilizing an entire industry in pursuit of ego. By noon, the op-ed was being quoted on financial news networks, dissected on talk shows, shared across social media. Hashtags that once supported Jordan now tangled with others accusing him of being opportunistic. The tide was shifting. At Skylux headquarters, Richard Lawson called an emergency board call. His voice was strained. "Jordan, they're coming hard. Fortress is promising shareholders stability if they take control. Some directors are wavering. We may not have the votes to hold this line." Jordan stood before the window of his office, looking down at the city below. "Then we don't play their game. We take it to the people." "What do you mean?" Lawson asked. Jordan turned, his eyes burning with quiet fire. "We launch Seat 2A publicly, not just as a foundation, but as a movement. We give passengers, employees, communities a voice louder than Fortress's money. They want a proxy war fine. We'll win in the court of public opinion before they ever cast a ballot." That night, Jordan held a press conference, unveiling the Seat 2A Foundation in front of a crowd of activists, passengers, and employees who had come forward with their own stories of bias. The backdrop was simple, a massive banner with the words, "Every seat has a story. Every passenger has a right." He spoke with the same calm conviction that had steadied him on the terminal floor. This fight isn't about a single seat or a single flight. It's about building an industry where dignity doesn't depend on your face, your wallet, or your status. Seat 2A will fund scholarships, support whistleblowers, and fight for systemic reforms not just here, but across all airlines. If Fortress Capital thinks dignity is bad for business, let them say it in front of the people whose tickets keep these planes flying. The crowd roared, cameras flashed. The momentum shifted again. But even in that triumph, Jordan knew the war was far from over. Fortress wouldn't fold because of applause. Bradley Whitfield was patient, ruthless, and well-connected. He would bide his time, strike when the noise quieted. Back home that evening, Jordan sat by the fire with Patricia, exhaustion pulling at his bones. "It feels like I'm walking a tightrope," he confessed. "One slip, and everything I've built, everything we've built falls." Patricia leaned against him. "Maybe, but look at what's happening. People who never thought about this before are marching, writing, demanding change. You didn't just refuse to move from that seat, you made others stand." Her words gave him pause, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. He thought again of Maya, of the little girl at the town hall who wanted to be a pilot, of Dorothy Henderson's frail but unyielding voice. He realized something vital. The fight was no longer his alone. The whispers in boardrooms might try to drown him, but the voices rising outside louder, braver, united would carry him forward. And that, he knew, was a war even Bradley Whitfield couldn't easily win. The storm clouds weren't only in boardrooms and headlines, they were in the skies themselves. A week after the launch of Seat 2A, Jordan Elias Maxwell boarded a short domestic flight. Not on Skylux this time, but on a partner airline. He needed to attend a closed-door meeting with regulators in Washington. But the moment he stepped onto the jet bridge, he felt the atmosphere shift. Passengers whispered, eyes flicking toward him. Some nodded in support. Some muttered under their breath. Flight attendants stiffened, not sure whether to treat him like a hero or troublemaker. Jordan moved quietly, carrying himself with the same steady grace as always. But he could feel the polarization. He had become more than a man, he was a symbol, and symbols always divided. He slid into his seat near the front, closed his eyes, and let the hum of the engine steady him. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But then he heard the faint scrape of a phone camera. Opening his eyes, he saw a man in the row across from him, pretending to check messages while recording. A younger woman leaned over the seat and whispered, "That's him, the CEO, the one who got the staff fired." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he forced a calm smile. He had learned long ago that dignity was a shield stronger than anger. Still, the whispers spread down the cabin, dividing passengers into two camps, those who cheered him with quiet nods, and those who glared as if his very presence threatened their comfort. When the flight landed in Washington, cameras waited at the gate. Somehow, the press knew he was on board. A reporter shoved a microphone toward him. "Mr. Maxwell, are you destabilizing the airline industry with your crusade? Some say flights are more tense now because of you." Jordan didn't break stride. If respect makes flights tense, maybe the problem isn't respect, it's what was there before it. His answer trended within minutes. That evening, in a windowless regulatory office, he sat across from officials of the Department of Transportation. Files were spread across the table: testimony, data, incident reports. Dorothy Henderson had accompanied him, frail but fierce, her presence a moral anchor. One official, gray-haired and pragmatic, leaned forward. "Mr. Maxwell, you've forced a spotlight, but the question is, can you sustain it? Fortress Capital's lobbying aggressively. They're framing this as a business issue, not a civil rights one. If they win, reforms will die before they begin." Jordan's voice was calm but firm. "This isn't just business. It's about whether our public spaces, our skies, belong equally to all citizens. If Fortress reduces it to profit margins, they're saying dignity is expendable. That's not just immoral, it's un-American." Dorothy tapped her cane against the floor, her voice soft but cutting. "I marched with Dr. King. Gentlemen, I was spat on, beaten, jailed. People told us then we were destabilizing the country. But history shows what was really unstable was the injustice itself. Don't repeat that mistake." The room fell silent. Slowly, the officials nodded, leaving the building later that night. Jordan looked up at the dark Washington sky. Patricia's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't lose the heart that makes people believe you." He knew the fight wasn't just in offices and boardrooms, it was in the air itself, in every whispered word, in every sideways glance on a flight. Back in Chicago, the counterattack grew sharper. Fortress Capital funneled money into ads portraying Jordan as a divisive billionaire out of touch with ordinary passengers. Gregory Harlan appeared in interviews, his tone measured but dripping with bitterness. I was humiliated by a man who thinks rules don't apply to him. I was just a paying customer. He made me the villain to build his brand. The narrative spread quickly across certain media channels, sowing doubt. Was Jordan fighting for justice or for ego? The question, repeated often enough, began to stick in the minds of some viewers. One night, Maya called him, her voice anxious. "Dad, kids on campus are arguing about you. Some think you're a hero. Others say you're just another rich man making noise." It's hard to hear. Jordan's chest tightened. "Sweetheart, people will always argue, but the truth doesn't live in the noise. It lives in the choices we make, and I'll keep making mine for you and for every kid like you who deserves better skies." She was quiet for a long moment before whispering, "Then I'll keep standing with you." The next morning, Alicia Reynolds stormed into his office. "They're trying to bait you into mistakes. Whitfield is daring you to respond with anger, so they can frame you as unstable. Don't give them that weapon." Jordan gave a weary smile. "Anger's easy. Patience is harder, but patience is how you outlast men like Whitfield." Yet patience was tested sooner than expected. At a televised shareholder forum, Bradley Whitfield himself appeared on stage, tall, polished, with the practiced charm of a predator in a tailored suit. He addressed the cameras with ease. "Skylux doesn't need activists masquerading as executives," Bradley declared smoothly. "It needs stability, profit, and loyalty to its paying customers. Mr. Maxwell wants to turn an airline into a soapbox. Fortress Capital wants to keep it in the skies where it belongs." The audience clapped politely, some nodding. Then it was Jordan's turn. He stepped to the microphone, his gaze steady, his words slow and deliberate. "Mr. Whitfield talks of stability, but what he means is silence. He means an industry where a child can be tasered for needing a restroom, where a mother can be slapped for asking for a pillow, where a black CEO can be dragged from his seat because he doesn't look the part. That's not stability. That's injustice with wings." The room froze. Cameras zoomed in. Jordan leaned forward. "And let me be clear, this isn't about me. This is about every passenger who's ever been told to move, to wait, to be quiet. Fortress Capital can buy shares, but it can't buy dignity. And dignity is what keeps the skies truly stable." The hall erupted cheers, shouts, some boos, but above it all, the undeniable electricity of truth. That night, news anchors replayed the clash on loop. Headlines framed it as a battle of visions, Maxwell versus Whitfield, justice or stability for the first time. Bradley Whitfield looked rattled. His smirk on stage had faltered, if only for a second, under Jordan's quiet fire. Back home, Patricia watched the coverage with Jordan. She touched his hand. "You didn't just answer him. You exposed him." Jordan's eyes stayed on the screen, thoughtful, determined. "Maybe, but the war's not over. He'll come harder next time." Patricia squeezed his hand. "Then be ready, and don't forget you're not standing alone anymore." As the firelight flickered in their living room, Jordan allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. He thought of Dorothy's cane striking the floor, Maya's trembling but loyal voice, Patricia's steady embrace. The shadows were deepening, but so was the resolve. The skies would never be the same again. The days following the shareholder forum felt like walking across glass. Every step Jordan Elias Maxwell took was amplified, magnified, scrutinized by friend and foe alike. He woke to headlines dissecting his words, commentators parsing his tone, bloggers speculating about his motives. Yet, beneath the noise, he sensed something deeper, a shift. Bradley Whitfield's narrative of stability no longer felt invincible. People were asking harder questions, but the counterattack came fast. That Friday evening, Ethan Clark rushed into Jordan's office, his phone in hand, his expression grim. "It's begun," he said. Jordan raised his brows. What has Ethan turned the screen toward him? A headline blared, "Exclusive CEO Jordan Maxwell's past business deals under scrutiny." The article painted Jordan as a ruthless executive, highlighting layoffs from a decade-old merger, twisting them into a story of callousness. Buried in the text was a quote from Gregory Harlan. "This man pretends to fight for dignity, but he's crushed more ordinary workers than Fortress ever has." Jordan read the words slowly, his face unreadable. Inside, though, something twisted. He remembered that merger, the sleepless nights, the impossible math, the decision to cut jobs in order to keep thousands more. It had never stopped haunting him. Patricia found him later at home, sitting in the dark with the article glowing on his phone. She touched his shoulder. "They're not attacking your decisions. They're attacking your humanity. Don't let them take it." Jordan shook his head. "What if people believe it? What if they think I'm no different than the men I fight against?" Patricia crouched in front of him, her eyes steady. "Then you tell the truth. Not the polished truth, the raw truth. People know perfection is fake. They'll forgive mistakes if they believe the heart behind them." The next day, Jordan did something his advisors warned against. He went live on Seat 2A's platform. No script, no polished backdrop, just his study at home. His voice was calm but tinged with vulnerability. "Yes, I made decisions in the past that hurt people, not because I wanted to, but because I was cornered by numbers that didn't leave me another option. I still think about the names, the families, and maybe that's why I fight so hard now, because I know what it feels like to be seen as expendable. I don't want anyone else to carry that weight." The video spread like wildfire. Critics tried to spin it as weakness, but many viewers saw something else: honesty. The comments filled with messages like, "Finally, a CEO who admits he's human." The tide steadied, if only a little. But Fortress wasn't finished. Within days, anonymous threats began arriving: emails, voicemails, even a letter slipped under the door of Seat 2A's office. "Drop this fight, or you'll regret it." Alicia Reynolds called the police, but she knew how these games worked. They want to rattle you. Jordan, make you second-guess yourself. It worked, at least in part. One night, Jordan found himself pacing the living room, hands trembling slightly. Patricia sat on the couch, watching him with quiet worry. "What if they go after Maya?" he whispered. The thought clawed at him. She's away at school, vulnerable. What if Fortress doesn't play by rules? Patricia rose and wrapped her arms around him. "Then we protect her. We bring security. We don't let fear write the story for us." Still, sleep evaded him. He carried the fear like an extra weight on his chest. Meanwhile, inside Skylux, fractures widened. Richard Lawson called late one night, his voice low and tired. "Jordan, half the board is wobbling. Fortress is promising quick profits if reforms are scrapped. They've scheduled a vote in 3 weeks to challenge my leadership. If they succeed, the reforms die." Jordan gripped the phone tighter. "Then, we don't just defend, we go on offense. How Lawson asked, we take every story, every testimony Seat 2A has collected, and we make them public. Not sanitized reports, real voices. Let the world hear the pain that's been ignored. Let them see this isn't about one man and one seat. It's about thousands." Lawson hesitated. That could expose Skylux to lawsuits. "That's the point." Jordan cut in, making action more costly than change. Within days, Seat 2A released a digital archive titled The Passenger Files. It contained hundreds of testimonies Black families denied boarding, Latino passengers mocked, disabled veterans humiliated. Each story was accompanied by voice recordings, photos, sometimes even video clips. The impact was seismic. News outlets covered it nonstop. Hashtags exploded. Politicians demanded hearings. Skylux's inbox overflowed with outrage. But with visibility came backlash. Bradley Whitfield appeared on a primetime interview, his face smooth, his voice calm. "This so-called archive is nothing more than a smear campaign," he declared. "We don't know if these stories are true. What we do know is that Mr. Maxwell is orchestrating chaos, not solutions. Shareholders want stability, and Fortress will deliver it." The interviewer pressed him. "But are you saying those passengers are lying?" Bradley smiled thinly. "I'm saying emotions don't build companies. Discipline does." The next morning, Jordan woke to find himself again at the center of the firestorm. Headlines framed it as a duel: Maxwell's voices versus Whitfield's discipline. Commentators argued over which vision would prevail. But amid the noise, something unexpected happened. Claire Donovan, the young flight attendant who had resigned after Flight 227, went public with her story. She appeared on a live stream with Maya Ortiz, her voice steady despite nerves. "I was there," Claire said. "I saw what Linda Hayes and Gregory Harlan did. I resigned because I couldn't stay silent. Jordan Maxwell didn't humiliate anyone. He exposed a truth that's been rotting in airline culture for years. And if Fortress Capital wins, nothing will change." Her words went viral within hours. For many, it was the first confirmation from an insider, and it shifted the narrative again. Fortress's carefully built story cracked under the weight of her authenticity. That night, Jordan sat in his office, Patricia beside him, Ethan and Alicia on a call. For the first time in weeks, he allowed a small smile. "The truth is fighting back." Alicia nodded, though her tone was cautious. "Yes, but Fortress will double down. They can't afford to lose this battle. The vote is coming. Jordan, the pressure will get uglier." Jordan leaned back, closing his eyes. He felt the exhaustion in his bones, the endless tug of hope and fear. But beneath it all, the ember of resolve burned steady. "They want me broken," he said quietly. "But all they've done is remind me why I can't stop. Because the moment I stop, the passengers lose. And I won't let that happen." Patricia squeezed his hand. "Then don't. Whatever comes, we'll walk through it together." Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night. Inside, Jordan felt the breaking point approaching, not just for him, but for the entire system. And he knew the next move would decide everything. The days leading up to the Skylux board vote were a blur of tension, strategy, and endless noise. Jordan Elias Maxwell moved through it all like a man carrying invisible armor. But inside, the pressure weighed heavy. Every headline felt like a battle drum. Every phone call was a negotiation. Every night brought less sleep. At Seat 2A's office, Ethan Clark spread charts and polling data across the conference table. His voice was brisk, his finger tapping numbers. Shareholder sentiment is split down the middle. 45% back Fortress, 43% back Reform, 12% undecided. That 12% decides everything. Jordan studied the numbers and what drives the undecided fear. Alicia Reynolds answered, setting down her coffee. Her tone was sharp, unyielding. They're afraid you're destabilizing the company. They don't doubt the discrimination, they doubt whether reform is survivable. Whitfield's message of stability appeals to their wallets. We have to prove reform is stability. Jordan leaned back, the weight of her words pressing against him. Then we need more than stories. We need evidence that justice strengthens business, not weakens it. Ethan nodded quickly. I've been pulling case studies companies that embraced equity and saw profits rise, airlines that expanded after reform. If we can tie dignity to dividends, we might sway them. Jordan exhaled. Then let's build the case. Numbers and narratives, side by side. That evening, he and Patricia shared a quiet dinner at home. She studied him as he pushed food around his plate. You haven't looked me in the eyes all night, she said gently. He sighed, setting down his fork. Because if I do, I'll see the truth I don't want to face, that I'm terrified. Not of losing the vote, but of what losing would mean, not just for me. For every passenger who dared to hope this time might be different. Patricia reached across, taking his hand. You've already changed the story. Jordan, even if Whitfield wins, the world saw what you stood for. You planted a seed they can't dig out. Her words settled him, but the knot in his chest remained. He wanted more than seeds, he wanted transformation. The next morning, Skylux's headquarters was surrounded by protesters. Some carried signs reading "Dignity in the Skies." Others shouted, "Down with Fortress." Reporters swarmed the sidewalks. Employees huddled by windows, whispering nervously. Inside, Richard Lawson called Jordan to his office. His face was drawn, his tie askew. They're pressuring me hard. Fortress has promised record dividends if they win. Some board members are leaning their way. I'm holding the line, but I can't guarantee anything. Jordan nodded slowly. Then let me speak to them, directly, not to persuade, but to remind them what's at stake. Lawson frowned. It could backfire. They see you as the lightning rod. You walk in there, they may harden against you. Jordan's voice was calm. Or they may see I'm not the caricature Whitfield's painting. I'll take that risk. The board session was scheduled for the next week. In the days before, Fortress escalated their campaign. Ads appeared across networks smiling families boarding planes, voiceovers promising comfort without chaos, ending with the Fortress logo. Gregory Harlan gave another interview, his tone polished. Airlines should unite, not divide. Fortress understands that. Maxwell doesn't. But truth had a way of fighting back. Claire Donovan appeared on national news again, this time with two other former flight attendants who backed her story. Their voices cracked but didn't break as they described years of whispered orders to prioritize certain passengers, years of looking the other way. Maxwell didn't create chaos, Claire said firmly. He revealed it. The clip went viral. Fortress scrambled to discredit her, but the damage was done. The undecided shareholders began asking harder questions. On the night before the vote, Jordan sat in his study, surrounded by notes, case studies, and letters from passengers. Patricia brought him tea, setting it beside him. She looked down at the piles of paper, then at him. You can't carry it all. Jordan, not alone. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing down. But if I don't, who will? She touched his cheek, forcing him to meet her eyes. The truth is already bigger than you. You lit it. Now others are carrying it too. Trust that. Her words stayed with him as he drifted into uneasy sleep. He dreamed of an endless airplane aisle, rows of passengers standing, watching him, waiting to see whether he would sit or keep walking. The next morning, the boardroom was packed. Skylux directors filled their seats, expressions hard to read. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but the hallway buzzed with anticipation. Fortress representatives sat at one end, polished and confident. Bradley Whitfield himself leaned back, his smirk razor-sharp. Jordan entered quietly, shoulders squared, every eye turned toward him. He spoke before anyone could object. "I know I'm not a board member," he began, his voice steady, "but I am the reason you're here today. You're not just voting on a CEO or a hedge fund. You're voting on the soul of this company, on whether the skies belong only to those who can pay, or to every human being who dares to dream of flight." He let the silence stretch. Some directors shifted, uncomfortable. Others leaned in. You can choose Fortress's promise of stability, but understand this stability without justice is illusion. Stability without respect is a lie, and the world sees through lies faster than ever. Choose Fortress, and you may gain short-term dividends. Choose reform, and you gain something far greater: trust. The trust of passengers, employees, communities, and trust is worth more than any dividend. His words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Then he stepped back, giving no further argument. Bradley Whitfield rose smoothly, his smile rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be swayed by theatrics. Airlines are businesses, not pulpits. Choose stability, choose profit, choose Fortress." The vote was called. One by one, directors cast their ballots. The room was silent except for the scratch of pens. Jordan stood still, Patricia's hand on his arm from the hallway beyond, the weight of history pressing down. The ballots were collected. Richard Lawson's voice trembled slightly as he began to read. Richard Lawson cleared his throat, his hand trembling slightly as he held the papers. The room was so silent that Jordan could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Outside, reporters pressed their ears to the glass doors, waiting for history. "The vote," Lawson said, pausing to steady his voice, "is 23 in favor of retaining reforms and Maxwell's initiatives, 19 against." For a split second, no one breathed. Then the room erupted, some with applause, some with angry whispers, others with stunned silence. Jordan stood still, the words echoing in his ears. They had done it. By 4 votes, they had kept reform alive. Bradley Whitfield's jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair, the smirk gone. His eyes found Jordan's, cold, promising the fight wasn't over. He gathered his papers with deliberate calm, but his hands shook just enough for Jordan to notice. Richard Lawson continued, his voice stronger now, effective immediately. "Skylux will adopt the reform package into its corporate charter. Furthermore, The oversight board will be independent and permanent." He looked around the room. This is no longer policy. This is identity. Some board members looked defeated, others relieved. A few leaned back, as though realizing the tide of history had pulled them forward whether they liked it or not. Jordan exhaled slowly, the weight of months pressing out of him. Patricia's hand squeezed his arm from the hallway. He caught her gaze through the glass doors, her eyes brimming with quiet triumph. But the moment of relief was short-lived. Whitfield rose, his voice cutting across the celebration. "Enjoy your hollow victory. Maxwell, you've won a boardroom, but I own the airwaves, I own the politics. This isn't the end, it's the opening salvo." He swept out, Fortress lawyers following like shadows. Richard Lawson leaned toward Jordan. "You know, he's right. He'll try again in Congress, in the markets, in the press." Jordan nodded, his expression calm. "Then we'll meet him wherever he shows up. The skies are ours to defend." That evening, the news broke worldwide. Skylux votes for reform. Screens filled with images of Jordan speaking, Patricia by his side, protesters cheering in the streets. Stocks wobbled at first, but then ticked upward as consumer trust surged. Within hours, passengers flooded social media with messages of support. Hashtags like "dignity" in the skies and "seat 2A" trended globally. At home, Jordan sat on the couch, exhausted. Maya, on video call from her dorm, her eyes shone. "Dad, everyone on campus is talking about you. Even my economics professor scrapped his lecture to analyze the shareholder vote. You're literally a case study now." Jordan chuckled softly. "I never wanted to be anyone's case study. I just wanted to keep my seat." "That's exactly why you're a case study," Maya replied. "Because you kept it, and you made it mean something bigger." Later that night, Jordan couldn't sleep. He walked into his study, where the model airplane from First Officer Patterson sat on the desk. He picked it up, running his fingers along its smooth wings. A simple object, yet it carried so much history. His phone buzzed, a message from Claire Donovan. "They called me today." It read, "I'm reinstated. Not because they wanted to, but because the oversight board forced their hand. Thank you for making sure voices like mine are finally protected." Jordan smiled, relief softening his chest. For once, justice hadn't stopped at words, it had reached lives. The following day, Patricia and Jordan were invited to a celebration at Skylux headquarters. Employees crowded the atrium, applauding as the couple entered. For the first time in months, Jordan saw genuine smiles from faces that had once glared at him. Richard Lawson handed him the microphone. Jordan cleared his throat, the applause fading into expectant silence. "This isn't my victory," he began. "It belongs to every passenger who ever felt invisible. It belongs to every employee who spoke up when silence was safer. And it belongs to all of you because you chose to see dignity not as a cost, but as a value." The room erupted again, some wiping tears. Patricia's eyes glistened as she watched him. Afterward, Captain Laura Singh approached, uniform crisp, her posture tall. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice formal but warm. "I'll be captaining the new Skylux flagship route next month. I want you to know, every decision I make will be guided by what you fought for." Jordan clasped her hand. "Then the skies are in good hands." But beneath the celebration, Jordan felt the ripple of Whitfield's threat. He knew the man wasn't bluffing. Fortress would regroup, politics would sharpen, the war was far from over. 2 nights later, his fears proved right. Janet Crawford, his political advisor, arrived at his home with urgent news. Bradley Whitfield filed exploratory papers. He's running for Senate. His platform, Freedom to Fly Act. He's framing it as stopping corporate overreach and defending passengers from so-called reverse discrimination. Jordan's stomach tightened. So he's taken the fight national. Janet nodded grimly. And with his money, he'll buy airtime everywhere. We need a counter-strategy, not just defense-offense. Jordan rubbed his temples. The exhaustion was bone-deep, but his resolve hardened. Then we start building coalitions now. This isn't just about one airline anymore. It's about whether dignity survives in every space we share: planes, buses, trains. If he wants a war, he'll have one. But it'll be fought with truth. Patricia touched his arm. You're not alone, Jordan. You never were. Remember that. The next morning, an unexpected letter arrived at his office. It was handwritten. The paper creased, the ink slightly smudged. He opened it carefully. Mr. Maxwell, it began. I'm a retired pilot. I've flown thousands of hours, seen the good and the ugly in this industry. I watched what they did to you, and I stayed silent. I regret that more than anything. But watching you refuse to move, then refuse to bend, reminded me that silence is complicity. You've given me courage to speak, even at this age. Thank you, Captain Henry Matthews. Jordan set the letter down, his throat tightening. Every voice mattered. Every conscience awakened was a victory Whitfield could never erase. Yet, as the sun set that evening, Jordan knew the hardest battles were still ahead. Fortress was wounded, but not defeated. Whitfield was powerful, and hatred was resilient. Still, for the first time, Jordan felt that he wasn't carrying the weight alone. The movement had spread. The vote had been won. But the war for the skies had just entered a new phase. The months after the board's vote were a whirlwind of change and conflict. Skylux's reforms were implemented quickly, not just on paper, but in practice. New training programs rolled out. Passengers received clearer channels to file complaints, and employees who once whispered their doubts now spoke openly about dignity and fairness. Yet, with every step forward, Fortress Capital pushed back harder, fueling doubts in the media, amplifying voices that called reform a political stunt. Jordan Elias Maxwell found himself on stages he had never sought. Universities invited him to lecture on leadership. Civil rights organizations asked him to keynote conferences. Even Congress called him to testify on transportation equity. Each time, he spoke not as a corporate titan, but as the man who had once been told to move from his seat. This isn't about airlines alone, he told lawmakers, his voice calm but unyielding. It's about the spaces we share: buses, trains, schools, offices. Do we treat dignity as negotiable or as sacred? The hearings aired nationally. Viewers saw not just a CEO, but a father, a widower, a man who carried the quiet strength of every insult endured and every injustice resisted. His testimony sparked bills that began to gather momentum, small steps toward larger change. At home, Patricia became his anchor more than ever. Some nights he returned late, weary and raw, dropping his briefcase by the door. She would greet him with a simple touch on his hand or a meal waiting on the table. "You're not saving the world alone," she would remind him. "You're just lighting lanterns. Others will carry them." Maya, from her college dorm, became his fiercest cheerleader. She joined student panels, wrote op-eds, even confronted classmates who mocked her father's fight. On a late-night call, she confessed, "Dad, for the first time, I feel proud to share our last name, not just proud of you, but proud that it means something in the world." Her words stayed with him. A reminder that his fight was never just about him. It was about the generations watching. Meanwhile, Fortress moved their battle into politics. Bradley Whitfield launched his Senate campaign with slick commercials and sharp slogans. His rallies attracted crowds who felt threatened by change, who painted reform as overreach. His freedom to fly agenda promised to strip oversight from airlines, to return dignity to those who pay for it. Janet Crawford worked tirelessly to counter him. She built coalitions of activists, community leaders, and business allies who believed reform was survival, not weakness. "We're not just defending Skylux anymore," she told Jordan one evening as they pored over strategy papers. "We're defending the principle that equality belongs everywhere." Whitfield's campaign isn't just politics, it's backlash. The fight grew ugly. Jordan's face appeared in attack ads, labeled a radical, an elitist, even a fraud. He ignored most of it. But at night, when the house was quiet, he sometimes replayed the insults in his mind. Doubt whispered at the edges of his resolve. One evening, Patricia found him staring at an attack commercial frozen on the TV screen. "They'll try to break you," she said softly. "But remember, they're shouting because they're afraid. Afraid of the world you're building." Jordan turned to her, weary but resolute. "Then we'll keep building until fear has no place left to hide." The climax came at a televised debate where Whitfield expected to dominate. Instead, Jordan's calm, steady words dismantled him piece by piece. "You talk about freedom," Jordan said evenly, looking Whitfield in the eye. "But whose freedom? The freedom of the privileged to humiliate the vulnerable, or the freedom of every person to sit without fear, to fly without shame, to live without being told they don't belong? If that's radical, then history itself is radical." The audience erupted in applause. Whitfield's smirk faltered. For the first time, cameras caught him looking uncertain. The weeks that followed shifted momentum. Polls tightened. Whitfield's inevitability cracked. Reform no longer seemed fragile. It looked like the future. But Jordan never let triumph swell into arrogance. He remembered Anna's voice, long gone but never forgotten, telling him to walk humbly, to fight with strength but also with grace. When journalists asked him if he wanted to run for office himself, he shook his head. "My role isn't in politics," he told them. "It's in making sure dignity isn't negotiable in boardrooms, in airports, in the everyday lives of ordinary people. That's enough for me." On the anniversary of the flight that had changed everything, Skylux invited him to unveil a plaque at the terminal where the incident began. The crowd was enormous passengers, employees, reporters, even lawmakers. Patricia stood at his side. Maya home from college just for the day. The plaque was simple but powerful. All seats earned. All faces welcome. As Jordan pulled the cloth away, the crowd erupted in cheers. He looked out at them, his chest tight with emotion. "This started with a seat," he said, his voice carrying through the terminal. "But it was never about upholstery or legroom. It was about who is allowed to sit in dignity and who is told to move. Today, that plaque isn't just for me. It's for every passenger who ever doubted their worth. And it's a promise to my daughter, to all of our children, that the skies will be safer, fairer, kinder. The applause shook the hall. Some people wiped tears. Maya squeezed his hand. Patricia leaned against his shoulder. As he stepped back, Jordan felt a profound stillness settle in him. Not finality, he knew the battles would continue, that Whitfield and others like him would never stop resisting change. But in that moment, he felt peace. He had kept his seat. He had turned humiliation into hope. He had rewritten the skies. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future really could hold more light than shadow. This story reminds us that dignity is not something we ask permission for. It is something we claim, even when it costs us. Jordan's experience was not simply about a seat on an airplane. It was about the choice to stand against small humiliations that echo centuries of injustice. His calm courage teaches us that true strength is not in shouting, but in refusing to shrink. For older audiences, this lesson carries a special resonance. Many of us have seen a lifetime of change, yet the question remains, will we stay silent when dignity is denied, or will we act? The answer is not always in grand gestures. It can be in a word spoken, a seat held, a refusal to look away. Jordan's story shows that standing for respect can ripple outward, inspiring institutions to change and communities to rise. In our own lives, whether in workplaces, families, or public spaces, we face the same test: do we choose comfort, or do we choose principle? The lesson is clear. Justice begins in small choices, and when we make them with courage, we remind the world and ourselves that dignity belongs to everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us through this story. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories of courage, justice, and hope to life.